All right. I am here with board-certified nutritionist Rachel Gregory. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I am really excited to have you on because you talk a lot about metabolic flexibility and working out and building muscles and all sorts of things that I like to talk about here on the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast with my audience. And I always like to get started with my guests' stories because usually we come from having this background where we struggled ourselves and we learned a lot of things that can help other people and fueled this passion. So why don't you share with us how you got started and got interested in this whole world of metabolic flexibility and training and nutrition and all that?
Sure. So we were talking a little bit off air. So I'm from New York. I was born and raised there. Yeah. And I grew up playing sports my whole life. So I was always interested in, my main sport was basketball, just all sports really. And as I went through high school, I thought that I was going to play basketball in college. I ended up getting injured, and that's what really kind of turned things for me in terms of what I wanted to do with my college career. So instead of pursuing a basketball career at like a D3 school, I decided to kind of shift gears and figured, if I wasn't going to be an athlete, I could treat athletes and still be in that realm of sports. And so I decided to get my undergrad in athletic training, sports medicine at the University of Miami. And so that was awesome. It was a great program. But I found myself as I was going through the program, got to like my junior year of college, I was really starting to get more into the nutrition side of things. I started doing triathlons in college for the Miami triathlon club team. So obviously doing triathlons, I had to, be on top of my nutrition as well. And looking back at it now, it's kind of crazy how things have changed from what my nutrition actually was and what I thought was like healthy, right?
Yeah.
Carb loading before bike rides and things like that. Not that that's inherently bad, but I was definitely going about it the completely wrong way.
Yeah.
So as I learned more about nutrition, I was taking classes related to, within my sports medicine trajectory within undergrad. We took a few nutrition classes and I just got really, really interested in all things nutrition. And I was kind of at this place my junior year where I was like, I don't know if I want to like do athletic training as my career because I'm now super, super interested in nutrition. So there was a part of me who wanted to kind of go back and take like the dietetics route. And I realized that it was a little bit too late for that. So I decided to pursue my master's degree in nutrition and exercise physiology. So I was able to go to James Madison University and get my master's in nutrition exercise physiology while I was working as an athletic training there. So it was pretty cool. I got that program, like the 2-year program, I was able to work there as a GA. So they, paid for it. So that was really, my parents love that. Free grad school. So that was awesome. And when I was in grad school, part of the 2-year program was we had to do a thesis study. And most of my classmates were looking into more like survey-based studies and things like that. And I knew that that wasn't something that was really going to interest me for 2 years. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more challenging. So I talked with my advisor, and at that point going into grad school, I got away from triathlons and I actually picked up CrossFit. So this was back in 2014. And so I got really into CrossFit. There wasn't really much out there in like the literature on CrossFit. So basically my advisor said, hey, pick an area that you want to study within nutrition and then exercise and see if you can combine that into a study. So CrossFit was my exercise population. And so I needed to find like a nutrition diet to basically implement to see kind of different results that were going to come out of that. And so I started to kind of dive into literature and basically look to see what wasn't there. So there was pretty much nothing looking at the ketogenic diet in non-elite CrossFit athletes. And I say non-elite because it's just like your average Joe who goes to CrossFit. And so that kind of brought me down the rabbit hole of keto. And this was, like I said, back in 2014. So it was just when keto was kind of getting popular. And so didn't really have any background in, I didn't know anything about it. I knew about Atkins and I knew a little bit about like ketones and kind of learning about that in some of the nutrition classes. But for the ketoacidosis side of things, so like the negative side of things, not like the positive side of things. So dove into that. And long story short, ended up doing the first study looking at the body composition and performance effects of a ketogenic diet in non-elite CrossFit athletes. That got published in 2017. And then I moved back to Florida after that. And I actually got a job as a nutrition scientist at a supplement company. Did that for a year, wasn't really super interested in it. And so I ended up moving out to California and starting my own coaching business. Dove down some other keto rabbit holes and eventually came to the place where keto was working for me and it was working for my clients. And then eventually the strict approach wasn't working for me anymore. I started becoming really carb phobic. Even just like whole food carbs, like fruit and sweet potatoes, was just really just afraid to eat them, right? Because keto worked for me for a while. And so I was like, oh, I never need carbs again. And so I kind of went back down another rabbit hole of trying to figure out how to implement carbs back into my life. And then also had some different goals with body composition and trying to kind of meld those together. And I was working with a lot of clients at the time too. And so that's where metabolic flexibility kind of came into my life, was just realizing that we can sort of have the best of both worlds if we figure out a way to do it strategically, and understand kind of a little bit of the science and the education behind it. So that's really what my goal is to educate people on the benefits of being metabolically flexible, using ketones for fuel when it's warranted, and then also being able to use carbs when it's warranted and needed, and also very individualized depending on the person and where they're at. So I think I hit everything. I know, actually, I missed one thing. I wrote a book on the ketogenic diet back in 2018, 19. I don't even know what year it is anymore. And so that helped to propel me into that world as well, a little bit more. And so now I'm here.
Awesome. That's great. And I love that you talked about that when you were doing keto, it worked really well for you. And you're like, hey, I'm never going to need carbs again. I also went through that. And I all of a sudden realized that I felt like keto was reaching its peak effectiveness for me. And I felt like, wow, I don't crave carbs anymore, but I feel like I need them. So it was right after my wedding, which was right at the start of the pandemic. So almost exactly 2 years ago, I just kind of felt like after my wedding, I was like, I feel like I need carbs because I was, doing strict keto before that. And I added them back in, and I felt like I had just as many benefits from when I was strict keto, because it felt like that's the natural progression that my body needed at that time. So I'm trying recently to kind of reconcile this, like, hey, keto worked really well. And now I added in these whole food carbohydrates. Like I was doing paleo first, kind of went back to a paleo approach, but keeping in mind things to maintain, keep my blood sugar stable. But I'm feeling so great on it. And I feel I haven't gained a pound. Like I feel exactly the same as in the height of when keto was working for me. And now I'm like having my carbs and eating them too. And it's this new thing that I feel like is now being sort of talked about a little bit more in the keto space, because a lot of people are like, oh, we need to do keto forever to keep our blood sugar super flatline. And that's not beneficial for long-term. Paul Saladino is talking about this. People are talking, Benazati is talking about keto flexing. So tell us a little bit about, maybe why prolonged ketosis isn't that great. And then what metabolic flexibility actually means, because we hear that term a lot, but it could be kind of ambiguous for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with metabolic flexibility and then kind of go probably down that rabbit hole a little bit, and feel free to interrupt me whenever,
for sure.
I tend to ramble.
So do I.
So I refer to metabolic flexibility as MetFlex. That's really like my company is named MetFlex Life, because I'm very, very passionate about being able to, again, learn more about metabolic flexibility. And, for me, it's not really like anything that you can absolutely be like, hey, I'm metabolically flexible, like 100%. Like it's something that you're always working towards, right? So you're always working towards, because metabolic flexibility is not just with diet, it's also with exercise as well, and training and all of that. And we can get into that. But basically metabolic flexibility is simply your body's ability to use different fuel sources when it's warranted, right? So we have our two main fuel sources that are fat and carbs. So fat in the form of fatty acids and ketones, and then carbs in the form of glucose, sugar, glycogen, whatever you want to call it. And so when you are like just sitting at your desk throughout the day, or you're going on a leisurely walk, where you're just trying to really focus during the day, right? We know like keto, you have a little bit heightened mental clarity, which is one of the huge benefits of keto. But if you've never gone into a state of ketosis, if you've never, taking yourself out of relying on carbohydrates as fuel, your body is not very efficient at using fat for fuel, because especially now, like in this day and age, right? So that's a little bit different, or a lot different than what it was like for our ancestors, right? So like our ancestors were metabolically flexible by necessity because they had to go through periods of feasting and fasting. And we know like through the research that pretty much our DNA is like 99% the same as it was thousands of years ago with our ancestors, but our environment is completely different, right? So we went from hunter gatherers, and now we're, factory, farm, grocery store on every corner, food at our fingertips. So we've become metabolically inflexible just based off of how we've evolved, right, over time. And so most of the Americans especially are metabolically inflexible because they're just so reliant on carbs their entire life, right? They're, have carbs all the time. They're never really able to tap into their body fat stores and to their fat stores to use as fuel when it's warranted. So metabolic flexibility is simply your ability to efficiently shift back and forth between those two fuel sources and using them at the proper time. So like I said, you're sitting at your desk, you're literally just like, you're not expending much energy, you're just using your brain, you're working throughout the day. You should be relying on fat as your main fuel source, right, during that time. But then when you're out and about, and maybe you're doing like you're lifting, you're doing pull-ups like you're talking about, or you're doing some high intensity training, like you should be able to tap in and use carbohydrates as fuel, because that is going to be the preferred fuel source and the most efficient fuel source for that type of activity. There's obviously nuances, that go within that, especially as you're working in different energy systems, and things like that. Like I'm sure you've, talked to people who are endurance athletes and they thrive off of using ketones for fuel and, fat for fuel in that regard. But with all that being said, from my experience over the years and working with clients, I work with a lot of clients who have come from the keto realm, and they've been keto for so long. And this is what happened to me. Like I was keto for a long period of time, and I basically was not eating carbs for a very long period of time. So I was very keto adapted, right? But I actually ended up becoming metabolically inflexible on that side of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about kind of the spectrum of those who are, solely using sugar for fuel versus solely using fat for fuel, like primarily, right? Yeah. If you're solely using sugar and carbs for fuel, you're going to be metabolically inflexible on that side of the spectrum, because you're not able to, like I said, tap into your fat stores efficiently. But, and that's probably most Americans, like I said, most people, at least, until keto became popular, maybe. So then when keto started becoming popular and people are like, okay, I'm going to, do this forever, I don't need carbs. You start to get on the other side of the spectrum, like way far that way. And then your body actually becomes metabolically inflexible because you're not able to actually use carbs as fuel anymore as efficiently. Not that you're not able to use them at all, but it's just not efficient because your body stops. It's like, if it's out of, people say out of sight, out of mind. If you're not using it, you're going to lose it. Right. So you lose those digestive enzymes. You lose the ability to use carbohydrates efficiently if you're that metabolically inflexible. So it's really finding a balance between that and realizing that like there's so many benefits to using ketones for fuel, to help regulate blood sugar, to help stabilize energy, all of the things, right? But we can't just completely negate carbs unless you're doing it for like a medical reason, or you have like a metabolic disease. But for the majority of us, especially like just women, that I work with a lot of women who are just looking to, be healthy overall, optimize their body composition. For the majority, like 90+% of those people, carbohydrates can be used strategically, and they probably should be, especially, as we get down to talking about lifting weights and things like that. So yeah, I know I kind of rambled a bit, but did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. And I found the same thing with me. So right after I started, when I was first starting to incorporate some carbohydrates, I put on my first ever continuous glucose monitor. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, I'm really bad at tolerating these carbohydrates. And no wonder why I had to be keto for so long. And while that part of that is true. I think I did also push myself into the area of becoming metabolically inflexible because now I have carbohydrates and it's been 2 years since I've been, having them on occasion, and my blood glucose responses are much better. And I feel so much better. And I feel that I can switch easily from both fuel sources. So I can easily use carbs when I need to. And then even though I am eating some carbohydrates, and on most days I may be having carbohydrates, I'll wake up and I'll test my ketones and it's like 1.1 ketones. I'm still in ketosis when I need to be, because my body has that flexibility. And I always feel that this is the best place to be, because you have the best of both worlds. Because a lot of people, their complaint about keto is that it's not sustainable. And I think it's because it's not supposed to be sustainable. I look at keto as sort of a hormetic stressor. Like our ancestors, maybe they didn't have food all winter long. So there's a lot of positive things, positive shifts that we see from putting our body under this stress. We get to improve insulin resistance. We get to do a lot of, there's a lot of anti-inflammatory benefits, so many, cognitive benefits to ketones. But then to be able to come out of it, because we're not in a prolonged winter, like we just don't want our body to be thinking that. So I know that a lot of people listening may be doing a ketogenic diet because they think that's what they should do to help their hormones and their blood sugar and all that. And I agree that it's a really amazing, amazing tool that I use with a lot of my clients, but I don't recommend it to be that end goal. So staying too long in ketosis can start to be problematic. So everything has this cost benefit, ratio, and it's just the benefits keep going until they peak, and then you kind of start to backslide. So what might you notice if you are maybe in ketosis too long? What are some of those problems that might start to show up for some people who are listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like what you said about the hormetic stress, right? So ketosis is a stress on our body. And it can be a good stress. And like you said, too much can be a bad stress. And that goes for anything, right? Same with exercise. Like exercise is amazing.
Fasting.
But too much of it, fasting is amazing, but too much of it is probably not that great. And I think especially for women, we do have, more sensitive hormones than men, right? So we react a little bit differently than men do to certain stressors. So I have seen keto longer term keto probably work a little bit better for males versus females. This is also highly independent too. Like there's been some females who I've worked with who've been pretty long-term keto for a long time, and they are still benefiting from it. But I would say that's probably more the realm of, more of the sedentary people, so not really working out, not being super, super active. So they don't necessarily need, a ton of carbohydrates, right?
Or maybe someone who's postmenopausal.
Yeah. Or postmenopausal, or if they're suffering from diabetes and things like that. So, or any other metabolic diseases that might feel good with lower carbs. But some signs that I've noticed, just working with clients that, if you've been in ketosis for a while, if you've been following a ketogenic diet for a while and you're starting to notice some of those negatives, the first one I would say is probably some sleep issues in the sense of just not being able to kind of wind down at night. So you're kind of not you're tired and wired, people call it, where you are you're so tired and you know that you need to, you can fall asleep, but your mind's racing. Your adrenaline's up, your cortisol is probably higher than it needs to be chronically. So sleep is one of the biggest things. A decrease in performance, whether you're training in the gym, lifting weights, or whatever sort of exercise you're doing. If you notice that your performance is just kind of stagnant for a period of time, and you're not able to push yourself, right? You feel like, maybe you are sleeping great, maybe you are, eating enough food, but you're not getting that kind of energy boost that you need to progress, or even feel good during your training. A few other signs would be, especially with women, some menstrual cycle dysregularities, blood sugar, like we talked about blood sugar dysregulation, but on the side of like you said, maybe you went, like you're usually eating lower carb keto, and then you went to a wedding and you were like, oh, I'm going to eat, a cupcake or something. And then all of a sudden you just have like this crazy blood sugar spike and crazy crash, or you just feel like crap for like the next 2 days. That is a huge sign that like, hey, I should be able to go to a wedding and have like a piece of cake or have a cookie and that be okay. Right. And not absolutely feel like crap the next day, or feel like I'm, crashing right after I have it, or like an hour after. So that's just one example. I for some reason, I always use a wedding example because it's just like, I don't know. It's just like one of those things, like you should be able to go to a wedding once in a while and be able to have something, or go out to dinner and have something that's off plan, quote unquote, and not feel like absolute crap. Right. So
Totally.
those would be just some of the most common signs that I would see with clients and with myself. And then last one I'll say is like a mental, not just the physiological side, but the mental side of things, just being, like I said, carb phobic, and literally just being afraid to eat whole food carbs like fruits and sweet potatoes and things and vegetables and things like that. That is a huge red flag, because for me, that's like, if you're afraid to eat fruit, then there's something going on there. And not necessarily that you have to eat fruit to be healthy or anything like that. But if it's a whole food carb, you should be able to
metabolize it,
not be afraid of that.
Yeah.
And metabolize it in an efficient way. So yeah, those are just a few.
Yeah, that's great. The only other one that I thought of is hair thinning, because that can become pretty common. And that was actually what was happening to me. I noticed that I was like, oh, my hair does not look as thick as it used to. And so that's what was one of the other signs. And then just feeling tired. Like I didn't feel that same energy that I had from the carbs. And you use the example of the wedding, but I was just at Universal Studios on Monday, and there's, in the Harry Potter world, they have this amazing ice cream place. And, I'm sensitive to dairy, all the things, it's got junk in it. And that's, when in Rome, I go to Harry Potter World and I have ice cream there. And I had my continuous glucose monitor on. And since we're walking all day, not even a blip on the radar, like we're just using it up. And so that's the kind of time where it's like, you really want to be prepared for these kind of things. So then you can have that moderate indiscretion once in a while and enjoy it. And it doesn't really set you back, and you could just keep going. So this is where we're aiming to go, to have this flexibility, to not be so restrictive, but the benefits of doing a stint of getting keto adapted, getting fat adapted for some time is really beneficial. And then to work on that flexibility. So is there a specific amount of time that you recommend a person maybe stay in ketosis? Is there like a marker that they might hit or realize, and then you start recommending carb cycling? What does that look like with your clients and your people?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I would say that, probably if I would answer this question, 2 years ago, I probably would have given you like, oh, it's this amount of time, or like around this ballpark. But just as I've grown, and worked with all different types of people, I think it's just so individualized, and it definitely depends on where they're starting out. Right. So if someone's starting out from like, they've been maybe doing paleo for a while and they're already accustomed to that lower carb realm, whole foods, right? Their body is probably already more metabolically flexible than someone who's coming from like the standard American diet, or coming from a really high carb intake. And so the person who's already metabolically flexible probably can go, into a state of ketosis for, maybe a month or maybe 2 months, and get, really keto adapted or fat adapted, and then start to introduce carbs. Someone who's, not metabolically flexible at all is probably going to take a longer time, right? To not only become fat adapted but to stay there for a little bit longer, and also maybe heal some other things that are going on, maybe some blood sugar dysregulation, things like that. And then I would also say it definitely does come down to activity level too. So like how active you are, because we know the more active you are, the more your body's going to use those carbohydrates for fuel. Like you said, you were, walking around all day, had that ice cream, didn't do anything. So that's going to be a huge piece of it, versus someone who's more sedentary. It's, that's going to play into it. And then also just general metabolic health as well is going to play a role. So I would say typically, just a general place to think about, if you are wanting to embark on a ketogenic diet, you've never done that before, you just want to like maybe you've had some issues with blood sugar or mental focus or, whatever it may be, and you want to try it, I would say at least like bare minimum, like a month, 3 weeks, like bare minimum. And then probably up to a few months to really become keto adapted, because we know that like you can start to produce ketones within 24 hours, even if you are just fasting or if you just completely cut your carbs down. But that doesn't mean that your body's actually utilizing those ketones for fuel, right? It takes time to recognize that fuel source. And it's just like anything else. Like if you've never used ketones as a fuel source before, your body's not going to recognize it. It's going to say, oh, I don't know what this is, I'm just going to pee it out, right? And that's why, when you measure your ketones in your pee or your urine, those might start to, skyrocket in the beginning, and then it might even dwindle down and you're kind of like, what's going on? But that's because your body is wasting those ketones.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, don't get the urine sticks because they're going to look really dark at first. You're going to be so excited that you're making all these ketones, and then it's going to slow down and it's going to fade again and get lighter. And you're going to think that, oh my gosh, what's happening? I'm not making ketones. I need to keto harder. And in fact, your body is just learning to use that new fuel. So I say the same recommendation.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying, it's very bio-individual when you should add carbs back in. Some things I like to have my clients keep in mind is, for me, it had a lot to do with my sugar cravings. So I couldn't add in carbs for quite some time because I added them in and it just woke up my sugar dragon. I was like, oh my goodness, I had some I was having raspberries. So I had to be super strict, no sweeteners, because that would wake up my sugar dragon. I have, electrolytes with flavoring in it. Forget it. I chug it and I'm like, give me sugar. It's crazy what it does to my brain and my biology.
Yeah.
So I had to get rid of that kind of thing. I would have a little bit of raspberries, and maybe this was like 3-4 months in. And as soon as I had that, I was craving sugar. I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I had just done keto to get rid of a lot of these cravings. So it took me a while to be able, for me, to get into a place where I could naturally moderate, because I was very much a all or nothing kind of person. And I think that was really, really driven from my blood sugar. So once I really controlled my blood sugar with keto, it took me some time before I was able to add those things back in. And then another thing that I notice with my clients is their ability to get back into ketosis after having carbs. So if you have a carb up and it's taking you 2 or 3 days to get back into ketosis, then I think you're not ready for it quite yet. And so I think that maybe pushing, another month or 2 and trying again until you're kind of able to get back in within a day. Or, there's no formula on it, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think that comes back exactly to how metabolically flexible you are, right? Because the more metabolically flexible you are, the easier it is for you to eat carbohydrates and then get back into a state of ketosis if that's your goal. And then also, metabolic flexibility and blood sugar regulation, do go hand in hand. So that's going to dictate that as well. But like you said, I think it's very bio-individual. And I think, especially with the craving side of things, I think that is super individualized too, because like you said, I work with a bunch of different types of clients, mostly women. And there are some of my clients who are more moderators, right? Where they can have a little bit more moderation with those things, like adding, things that are higher in sugars, raspberries, whatever it may be, anything that's a little bit higher in carbs. And they're okay with that, versus like you mentioned, maybe someone who is more of an abstainer or needs to be more of an abstainer. Those triggers just aren't worth it. Right. And so that is where we have to kind of find that individual's, threshold of where they can, start to incorporate carbs if they're ready to do that. But then also like looking at some other factors that are going on as well in terms of their stress levels, their activity, where they're at on their journey, like what type of goal they have, within their body composition, right? Because that's going to make a difference too, whether they're trying to lose body fat or they're just trying to maintain or they're trying to build muscle, like that's going to play into some things as well. So
awesome. Yeah, thanks. So speaking of, working out and muscles and all that, so let's talk about maybe some of the benefits of exercise and movement on metabolic flexibility, and then maybe how different types of exercise, start to impact different systems or what's impacting those.
Mhm.
And yeah, we'll start talking about, about that.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to like the exercise portion of metabolic flexibility, I always just kind of talk about the different energy systems that we have in our body, right? So we have like mainly the aerobic system, which you're using oxygen for. So those are more of your kind of lower intensity activities where you can utilize oxygen for fuel versus your anaerobic system, which is more of the higher intensity activities. Thinking, like CrossFit style workouts, high intensity workouts, lifting weights versus lower intensity aerobic would be, if you're just walking outside or you're running a marathon or something like that, right? So those are our two main energy systems. And so within those working within those different energy systems can also help you to become more metabolically flexible from that standpoint, because you're utilizing different fuel sources during those times. The issue that a lot of people think about is that you're like, and I thought this for a while too, it's like you're either in one energy system or you're not. So like you're either in the anaerobic system or you're in the aerobic system. But what a lot of people don't realize is that you're actually going back and forth between those. Even if you're doing a high intensity interval training workout, yes, you might be in an anaerobic system for using your anaerobic system for the majority of time, but you're still kind of teetering between the anaerobic aerobic system. And so this is why, coming back to CrossFit training, if, most people hear CrossFit and they're like, oh man, you definitely need carbs for CrossFit because it's high intensity, right? But what they don't realize is that when you are more metabolically flexible, you're able to recover better and you're able to actually spare some of the carbohydrates that you're maybe consuming during your workout. So say you're doing a high intensity CrossFit workout and, the majority of the first part of the workout is more just like strength training. And this is what a lot of people don't realize too with CrossFit and some of those workouts. You're not doing an hour straight of high intensity, right? You're going through different things. And so if you are, utilizing carbohydrates during that high intensity bout, but then when you're doing maybe a lower intensity bout of something, or you're just doing some back squats every few minutes, like maybe you're doing like a 1 rep max back squat, for example, and you're resting for like 5 minutes, you're going to be, hopefully using obviously those carbohydrates, but then you want to be able to use some fat for recovery as well. And then also thinking about like the next workout. So I guess I'm being a little bit confusing here, but really the idea is that the more metabolically flexible you are, the more you can utilize those carbs for that actual activity, and then spare some of those, spare some of that glucose, spare some of that glycogen when you're in that recovery mode, or when you're in when you're working more in the aerobic system, right? Because then you can tap into your fat stores to use those for fuel and for recovery as well. So that's one of the biggest things in terms of becoming more metabolically flexible. And then also knowing if you're more metabolically flexible is being able to work in those different energy systems. Did that kind of answer that question?
Yeah.
I know I was a
for
little
sure.
roundabout there.
No. Yeah. That's good, because I didn't realize. So this is my understanding. At the higher intensities, we're in this anaerobic state that's more fueled by carbs. Is that correct? Carbs and sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And then in
Yeah.
those lower states, and you would count running a marathon in an aerobic state?
I would say that depending on what zone, like what zone you're in terms of heart rate zone, and like, so if you're like an elite athlete, then you might be working a lot in the anaerobic state. But if you're like someone who's just running long distance, and it doesn't have to be a marathon, but if you're running long distance and it's at a lower pace, right, like a moderate pace, then you're going to hopefully be more in your aerobic system, utilizing oxygen for fuel to be able to maintain that pace for that long period of time. Versus if you were going to do like an all-out sprint, you would be using mostly glucose, mostly like creatine monohydrate, that system, creatine phosphate, that system, which is like the 10 seconds, all out bout. Okay. And then as you get further along, as the time goes on, you'll start to utilize more in that aerobic system, because you just can't maintain such a high intensity for a long period of time. That's why they call it high intensity.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. So how do we fuel properly for a workout that is, let's say, a CrossFit workout that's high intensity, but some mixes of like we're doing some lifting, we're doing some explosive stuff, and we're doing some recovery. So that's a question I get a lot. So how would you recommend people fuel for this? Especially like you can talk about keto, non-keto, all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that this kind of goes for all types of, it doesn't have to be just CrossFit, but even like just lifting in general. Like if you're just resistance training or strength training, going to the gym for, an hour and you're just lifting. And for me, like I don't do many CrossFit workouts anymore. I'm strictly into more of the bodybuilding style of training. But I like to kind of give the practical advice of just thinking about it in the way that, okay, I'm going to structure my carbohydrates for the day around my workout. So pre and post workout, because I know that if I structure them pre-workout, I know that that's going to give me a little bit of energy for the upcoming workout. Obviously there's some things that we can dive into that too, like pairing your carbs with protein and with a little bit of fat to help regulate that blood sugar response, because that's a mistake that people make. It's like, oh, I need carbs for my workout, so I'm just going to go eat a bowl of cereal or whatever, with skim milk, which is basically all carbs, maybe a little protein. And then your blood sugar goes up and you're like, oh yeah, I'm ready for my workout. And then you go to your workout and then half an hour in, you're just like tanked, dead on the floor because because your blood sugar is crashing. So you definitely have to make sure that you're pairing those carbohydrates with, a protein, at least a protein source, and then a little bit of fat, just to help, regulate that. And then to help keep your energy levels stable throughout the workout. So that would be like a pre-workout, and there's specifics with that, obviously, how close you're eating to your workout or how far away. And then post-workout, right? Thinking about, okay, I'm going to structure my carbs pre and post-workout. Post-workout is going to be important to help me get back into that parasympathetic state, rest and digest mode. So thinking about, with carbohydrates, we know that obviously when you eat carbohydrates, they spike insulin. But insulin is not necessarily the devil, right? We know that, there's a lot of people think that insulin is the devil, that you should never spike insulin, but we know that that's not the case, right? Obviously, if you are insulin resistant and if you're, chronically high insulin levels, like that's an issue, right? But post-workout, if you just did a really intense workout, spiking that insulin can actually help reduce cortisol, because they have an inverse relationship. And so bringing that cortisol down can help bring you more into that rest and digest mode, which is actually going to facilitate recovery quicker, right? Because once we finish our workout, we know that, for lifting weights, we're breaking down our muscles, we're breaking down everything that's, in the gym, whether it's lifting weights or whatever exercise you're doing. But you need to get back into that recovery mode in order to actually build muscle, right? Because your muscles aren't built in the gym, they're built during your recovery. So having carbohydrates post-workout, obviously combined with protein for sure, and maybe a little bit of fat, is absolutely going to be a great way to bring you back into that rest and digest parasympathetic mode. So that's what I like to think about, especially if I'm, helping someone transition to incorporating carbs back into their life after prolonged keto. I tend to always do it around your workout, and obviously titrating up and down depending on the person. And then just practically thinking about, okay, if I'm putting most of my carbs around my workout, then the other bookends of the day are probably going to be more so like fat and protein. And then maybe some non-starchy vegetables. And so like a good rule of thumb, and this is not exact, this is just something to think about 50% of your carbohydrates around your workout, and then maybe the other 50% scattered throughout the day, coming from more non-starchy vegetables, things like that. And then around your workout, protein, carbs, and a little bit of fat. And then on that bookend, more protein and fat.
Perfect. That sounds great. And that sounds like what I've sort of discovered naturally of doing. It's kind of funny how we, when you're tuned into your body and how it feels, and, paying attention to what your performance and your workouts, it's like this kind of stuff kind of shows up, and it makes sense that you would want to fuel and then maybe replenish those glycogen stores. And we also do have much better insulin sensitivity right after a workout. So that's another great thing. And it's another benefit to having your carbs around your workouts is that you have the carb before the workout and you will use a lot of that sugar. So you might not see anything on your continuous glucose monitor. You may get a rise in your blood sugar because of an intense workout. But what would you say to someone who is experiencing that? Like, oh my God, my blood sugar went up because I worked out.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that is, if you're doing an intense workout and your blood sugar does not go up at all, and it's an intense workout, I say that kind of funny because sometimes people feel like something's intense and it's really not. But anyway, that's a whole different discussion. But if
Yeah.
you're really truly doing an intense workout, your blood sugar should go up because that is a stress, right? That's a
Yep.
stress on your body. Just like if you're sitting in traffic and someone, or whatever, sitting in your car and someone cuts you off and you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, like this has happened to me. Like my blood sugar spikes because I just get like really angry or just really stressed at that time. Or if, whatever happens, right? Any stressor that happens, like that's your body's natural response. Because adrenaline's being released, like it's a survival mechanism. And so exercise is a stress to your body. So if you don't have any response to that, then there's probably something else going on there that's not so great. So yeah, I would say it's absolutely normal for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So your blood sugar might spike during these intensive workouts, and that's okay. We don't want to avoid the spike because the intense workouts, if your adrenals can handle it, which mine cannot at the moment, if your adrenals can handle it, then it is a good thing to put your body through this, intense workout. And because you will have better insulin and glucose sensitivity later on. So you'll see the benefits after the workout, just like you're not building the muscles while you're at the gym. It happens later on in the recovery period. So all of these things, don't worry about the exact numbers, because I have a lot of people kind of like micromanaging their blood sugar and getting so nervous when it goes up for these natural causes. So I just wanted to share that. And then, like I said, after the workout, you do have better insulin sensitivity, and also you just depleted the muscles and your liver of a lot of this stored sugar. So then it kind of goes right back without spiking your sugar a lot. So you might get that insulin release, which we don't really see on the continuous glucose graph, but that's also helping to build, right? So insulin is anabolic, it's building our muscles, it's putting things where they need to go. So we don't want to be afraid of insulin. We just don't want it every single, 18 times a day, being spiked 18 times a day after a workout. That's a very normal, appropriate time. So we can, as humans, we want to simplify things because stuff is confusing. There's a lot of information. And so we like to think like high blood sugar, bad, high insulin is bad. We can't use those simple terms. We have to find that like Goldilocks spot for things. So it's like, we don't want to be too high. We don't want to be too low, just like on a CGM where we have that happy green zone. We just, kind of staying in that zone, we're good. We just don't want it over and over and over. So, talking about different exercises, I have, a lot of women listen to this podcast, and I see a lot of people heading towards, the treadmill and, oh, I have to get back into shape. I have to do like 45 minutes on the elliptical or 75 minutes on the elliptical, or tell me about workouts and movements or whatever those are that would be most beneficial and perhaps least beneficial when it comes to metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, sure. So I think with metabolic flexibility, having a different, like working out, like I said before, in different energy systems can be very beneficial for that. And so, I kind of already mentioned that, so I won't repeat myself there. But when it comes to just overall health and overall confidence, especially like I would work with a lot of women as well, from a body composition standpoint, I think that's something that people are very interested in. That's one of the reasons why they're going to go on the elliptical for 5 minutes, is if they want to lose body fat or, look toned or whatever it may be. So just one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of women making is actually doing too much high intensity training or too much circuit style training, and not actually focused on building muscle and focused on training or hypertrophy style training that's actually going to build that muscle, right? Build that muscle tissue, because we know that, that toned look that everybody wants, that's not going to come from just, hours on the treadmill and, being in a chronic deficit and losing body fat. Yes, you can lose body fat by just doing that. But if you want to look toned, you have to have muscle underneath that body fat, right? It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. And that muscle is going to come from actually putting your muscles under a stressor, a good stressor, right? But then also recovering from that stressor. And so for years, like I said, I did CrossFit for years, and I was chasing body composition changes. And I actually, there was a period of time where I was more focused on the performance side of things, on the body composition side of things. But then when I started to focus more on the body composition side of things, CrossFit really wasn't working for me anymore, because I was doing a lot of work, like a lot of hard work, and a lot of intense work, but I wasn't actually doing the right type of work, I guess you could say. So getting that toned look, I guess everybody says I use the word toned a lot because it's what everybody refers to. It's basically having muscle. And so some women are afraid to look bulky or big, but you have to build muscle in order to get that look. And that requires recovery. That requires following a program that is smart, strategic, focused on actually hypertrophy style training, which just means training that's specific to building muscle. And that is also a lot of people get caught up in this, like feeling like they need to be, sweating during their workout all the time or sore after every workout, when in reality, like for me, I barely sweat that much during my workouts if I'm just focused on lifting. Obviously, if I'm doing a high intensity session, right? But I know that I'm, getting the stimulus that I need. I'm training close to failure when it comes to building muscle. I'm doing the proper movements that are important for building different areas of my body. So whether that's shoulders or glutes, everybody wants a great butt, right? So doing proper exercises, but then also recovering from those as well. So one of the biggest mistakes I see women make is like I said, doing a lot of circuit style training, doing a lot of maybe lighter weight training and trying to get their heart rate up versus focused on actually lifting heavy and doing the proper movements to actually stimulate that muscle growth to get that the look that you want. And then also realizing that like having more muscle is just going to benefit so many different areas of your life aside from body composition, longevity, overall health. Muscle is the most metabolic tissue that we have in our body. More muscle you have in your body, likely the more you're going to be able to, eat a little bit more and feel good and feel your best overall as you age as well. So I think muscle is super underrated, especially when it comes to females. And that's one of the messages that I like to preach, especially within my programs and on my within my blog posts and website and all that stuff. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I always tell my clients and my students, there's no better feeling than feeling strong. And when I met my wife, she really trained her upper body a lot. And I was like, I want to do that, because we as women, we tend to stay away from that because we don't want to look bulky. And it's like, you have to work so hard and you don't have the hormones to be bulky. Like you just, as women, we won't bulk. We will, you'll tone, you'll build muscle, but you're not going to be bulky. People work really hard to get that bulky look. And usually it involves a lot of testosterone that we don't have. Right. And maybe some, artificial things that are not even in our body naturally. Right. So building muscle is so important, and just you feel so much more energetic. You bend down to get something off the floor. There have been times where there's been periods I've taken off of working out and I'll like groan to get something on the floor. I'm like, this is pathetic. I'm in my 30s. This is not happening. And then once you get back and you're working out regularly, you're building muscle, you're gaining, endurance, your body, you just pick something up. You're like, gosh, I could just, run up this hill, and I could, you just have so much more energy to do things. Things don't fatigue you, and you have just much more, I feel like, mental endurance and strength as well. I feel like it's something that it's just a really powerful feeling, especially as a woman, to feel strong. I think it feels really good. And I think it's underrated. And like you said, muscle has so many health benefits. And especially as we late age, women, we tend to lose muscle. We all lose muscle. So, depending on where you are in your life cycle, it's never too late to start, but you really need to start. I think you want to start as early as you can, because it gets harder and harder to put on muscle. Like my mom is going to be 65 and she works out all the time. And she's like, I'm just afraid that if I ever stop, I'll lose this motivation. And I don't want to lose my ability to move. Like I want to be able to do things and visit you and walk around and, go hiking and do all these things. And we don't realize that, like, we take it for granted at our young age that we're able to do these things. But, I just went to Universal. Like I said, I saw a lot of people in these scooters and, pushing themselves. I'm like, I don't want that ever to be me. I always want to be able to walk around and live my life. And so I think that like discipline creates freedom. So when we're disciplined and we're building muscle and we're working hard and we put ourselves through this pain, creates this freedom to be able to do what we want. And same thing with nutrition. If we could be disciplined to have the foods that are helpful for our body, that are healing our body, that are nourishing our body, we get the payoff that we can do what we want. We don't have to take a, sick day on the couch, or I just don't feel well, or my period's so bad. We can do what we want when we want. And that's kind of how I live my life. I just want to feel good so I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So working out, building muscles, super important. And I had a question about, okay, so we said that women want to go on the treadmill or on the elliptical to burn body fat. But what I just learned is that is putting you in a carb burning state. So does it burn body fat or not?
So I think there's a little bit of confusion from like the carb burning versus fat burning state type of a jargon. I don't really like to refer to that. Yes, there's going to be like, people have probably heard of fasted cardio. You should do fasted cardio because you'll burn more body fat versus doing fed cardio or whatever. So there's confusion there because yes, you might be utilizing more fat during that fasted cardio because your body is in that fasted state, if you think about it practically. So maybe, you're utilizing more fat, more ketones. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're burning more body fat overall, because overall we know that it does come down to the energy balance side of things. And so what I would say is from a cardio aspect, the reason why cardio tends to be something that can be helpful if you implement it strategically, can absolutely be helpful for losing body fat, right? Losing weight. But what people don't realize is that your body adapts very quickly to cardio and you become much more efficient at it as time goes on, right? So if you're using cardio to quote unquote burn off the cookie you just ate, maybe that works, the first week or two, but your body is going to become very efficient at that cardio. So an easy way to think about it is, if you go out and run a mile right now and you haven't run in a while, say you burn, I don't know, 100 calories running that mile today, and then you go run that mile again next week, maybe your body is like, oh, now I'm used to this. Okay, I'm going to only burn 90 calories doing this because I'm becoming more efficient. And then the next week, maybe you only burn 80 calories. And don't take the calorie number.
Right. I get it.
It's just an example, but that's for any type of cardio, because we know that the more efficient you become at something, the less energy you're going to use to do that thing. Right. So when you're using cardio as a tool for fat loss, you don't want to become efficient at it, because if your goal is to use it to burn calories or burn energy, you want to be least efficient at it. If your goal is to go run a mile because you want to train for an event or train for a marathon or something like that, yes, you want to become more efficient because you want to use less energy and be able, sorry, I almost dropped my water. You want to be able to do that in a way that is more like sustainable, right? So there's different ways that we have to look at cardio, and it all comes down to that goal. So if your goal is to use cardio as a tool for fat loss, you have to be very strategic in the way that you implement it. And if your goal is to do cardio for performance gains, then that's a whole different area that we talk about, right? So when I'm helping someone to, if their goal is to lose body fat, primarily we're going to be focused on diet. And the second thing that we're going to be focused on is overall movement throughout the day. So that would be kind of the second piece of it. And that is also going to kind of play into cardio a little bit, and we can talk through that. But then cardio would be probably the last thing that I would implement when things start to stall out, because like I said, you become more efficient at it, or you can adapt to it very easily, versus strength training. Your body adapts to that, but it's a lot less likely, because you're going to continue to progress through progressive overload. Yeah. So with that being said, cardio is definitely beneficial, but you have to do it strategically, and you have to be really smart about how you implement it within a fat loss goal, for sure.
Okay, cool. Interesting. I've never heard it explained that way. And I never knew that you got more efficient at it like that quickly. And then you're burning fewer calories. And I've never heard that before. That's really interesting. And I am not a cardio lover. And so it feels like really good news for me. I don't know. That's just how I took it. So put me in front of a barbell any day and I'm a happy camper, and slap on a pair of running shoes and I'll fake a sprained ankle. I don't know. It's just, I was not, my body was not built to run. I'll just put it that way.
It's funny you say that because I did triathlons in college. I did a lot of endurance running, cycling, swimming, all that stuff. And I don't think I've run in maybe 2-3 years, but the period of time because I went through my own body composition transformation a few years ago when I actually stopped doing CrossFit and stopped doing a ton of cardio and conditioning and focused on more of the strength hypertrophy training, lost, about 20 pounds. And I've been able to maintain that for years. But within that period of time, I did no running. I did no high intensity training. All I did was focus on my diet, focus on lifting weights, and focus on my movement throughout the day. And then maybe incorporating some low intensity sessions as I progressed. Right. And I'm going to mention one more thing because this is something that a lot of people get confused about too. I get this question a lot, like what is better for fat loss when it comes to cardio, high intensity training or low intensity training, right? Low intensity steady state or high intensity interval training. And the thing that people don't think about is, yes, you might quote unquote burn more calories doing high intensity training in a shorter period of time. But if you are focused on losing body fat, right, and that's your goal, you're obviously going to be in a calorie deficit. You have to be in a calorie deficit to lose body fat. That in itself is a stress to your body, right? We were talking about stressors in the beginning of this episode. You're already in, that's a stress no matter what. Being in a calorie deficit is a stress to your body. If you're going to go out and do a ton of high intensity training to burn more calories, that's adding a ton more stress to your body. And so you're going to be putting yourself in a situation where you're going to be chronically stressed. Hormones are probably going to be taking a bigger hit versus if you were to utilize low intensity steady state cardio or like zone 2 training where you have your heart rate, lower, moderate, and you're able to sustain that for a long period of time. Yes, it might take a little bit longer, but you're going to be utilizing the ability to not only burn more calories through that, but also to kind of kill two birds with one stone in terms of getting into a recovery state, right? Because just walking on the treadmill at a moderate pace or just going outside and walking, getting steps in, that is going to facilitate more recovery, facilitate blood sugar regulation, all of that. And yes, you'll burn more calories too if you do that for a period of time. So that's something that I think a lot of people mistake, is that they feel like they need to do more high intensity stuff to lose more body fat. But oftentimes it's typically that you should be focusing on diet, overall movement, and actually doing some more low intensity training to actually be able to sustain that deficit for the period of time that you need to in order to lose that body fat. So I know I went off on a tangent, but
no, that's great.
It's a mistake that I see a lot of people making, and I did it myself for years. So
yeah. And I think a lot of us have that old mentality. Like, that's why I said that, women are just magnetized to these treadmills and the ellipticals. And it's like, my wife and I, when we go to the gym, we're the only women in the weightlifting section. And it's like, come on, ladies, come pick up the dumbbells, come stand next to a bar, like it's really empowering. And it could be scary at first, but obviously working with someone and working with a trainer in person to learn how to do these lifts and learn your form. What kind of advice do you have for people? Because this is your realm of, working out. And I know you do plans on your website. So what would you recommend to someone who's like, I've never picked up a weight, this scares me, but I feel like I want to try it?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is just don't be scared. Just get started, and you don't even have to pick up a barbell, right? It's starting with dumbbells, starting with things that are going to be a little bit safer, I guess you could say. But also realizing, building muscle, I haven't picked up in terms of like a barbell, putting a barbell on my back in a long time. Like I haven't done barbell back squats in a long time because I utilize different machines in my gym, like hack squat machines, other modalities, right? So you don't always have to, put a barbell on your back to be successful with,
Yeah.
building
And
muscle
don't start with a
training.
back squat because your mobility won't be able to take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So starting simple. And also one big thing I would say, obviously, if you have never lifted before and you're kind of worried about, injury or form, definitely starting off with maybe a few sessions with an in-person trainer can be great. If you are like, maybe you lifted in the past and you just haven't done it in a while, so you already kind of have a foundation. I think one of the biggest things is just really focusing on that form and technique from the get-go and not trying to just do more, right? So quality over quantity. And then also filming yourself, right? Actually seeing what you're doing. So don't be afraid to like set your phone up in a corner, or like I have a little thing that I don't even know what it's called, a tripod. that I use. And so I'll film myself, and sometimes it's to put on,
on the
my
gram.
YouTube channel for exercises. Or on the gram. But a lot of the time it's just to be able to film myself and go back and look at my technique and say, hey, I thought I was doing this, but now that I look at the video, I'm definitely not doing that. So that's what I should work on for the next set or in the next session. And so don't be afraid to film yourself, because if you see what you're doing, like without, just thinking that you're doing it, that can actually help you to progress a lot faster. So like with my clients, I work with a lot of one-on-one clients, and in my membership, I do ask them to film themselves sometimes so that I can see and give them feedback on their technique, because then they'll be able to progress that, moving forward and also not get injured. So that's one of the biggest things, is don't be afraid to film yourself, and don't be afraid to, just start, right? Just start, and you're going to get better as you go.
Yeah. Awesome. I was going to ask if you had any other advice for anyone in terms of, anything we've talked about today, just your best advice for someone who's wanting to be metabolically flexible and, build muscle. But I think when you just said, just get started, that's great.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else coming to mind?
Yeah. So one other thing that we didn't really talk about, and this is probably could be a whole podcast on itself, is the importance of protein. So I'm a
let's
huge
talk about
proponent
this.
of protein.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that I made the mistake for years of under eating protein, especially with keto and starting off thinking that I needed to, drastically reduce my protein in order to produce ketones. And we know that that's probably not the case. That's not the case for most people. There's this whole, period of time where gluconeogenesis became a huge thing, and people are like, oh, like you can't have any protein because it's going to spike your blood sugar, spike your insulin, and all of that, which we just kind of already talked about. But protein is one of those things that, especially for women, I don't like. Probably 95% of my clients that I work with who first come to me are under eating protein. And a lot of them are coming from that keto space, where, they're really focused on the fat and reducing the carbs, and then protein is just too low for what they're trying to do. So you're talking about hair thinning before. That's a sign, at least from what I've seen, of, too low of protein intake. So I think protein is super, super important. There's so many processes in your body that need protein, but specifically building muscle and maintaining muscle mass. Like if you're not fueling appropriately for that, if you're not getting enough protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and you're doing all this work in the gym, you're going to be doing a lot of work and not getting barely any reward from it. So protein is like one of those things. And then when it comes to body composition as well, and also, if you are looking to lose body fat, we know protein is one of the most satiating nutrients. It's the hardest nutrient to store is body fat. And there's literally studies that have come out, that are continuing to come out, that putting people in a calorie deficit and ramping up their protein intake, they do not put on body fat from that protein. And so these are some protein overfeeding studies that have come out recently. Obviously there's some nuances there, and there's resistance training involved and all of that. So this can't be, to the masses, it depends. Yeah. It's all individual too. Right. So, but just realizing that protein is the hardest macronutrient to store as body fat. If your goal is to lose body fat, that's something to think about, right? Ramping that up. Obviously if you have blood sugar dysregulation, and if you struggle with that, that's the individuality side of things. Some people are more reactive to higher protein than others. But if you are someone who's working out regularly, if you're overall metabolically healthy and you're not getting enough protein, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. Yeah.
I totally agree. And I see that a lot in the keto community. And what I recommend to my clients is, yeah, you can start out with the lower protein if you want to just get into ketosis. But as soon as you're there, start dialing up that protein again, because you're going to need it. And, I was talking with my uncle who was on the phone, and he was doing keto right at the beginning of the pandemic. And he's like, it says I can only have a 4-ounce steak. I'm like, don't do it. Don't listen. Like, you can't only have 4 ounces of protein if you're like a grown man at a meal, that's just not enough. So, having protein, it's really satiating. Of course, if you fall in the reactive hypoglycemia camp, which is a lot of people I work with, getting the fattier cuts of protein to help stabilize is really beneficial. But, if we're talking about performance and working out, probably not in the reactive hypoglycemia camp, because a lot of them can't work out very much, depending on where they are in the spectrum. But the protein can't be overstated. It's so, so, so important. And we think about protein, we know it's important for building muscles and hair and bones and teeth and nails and things like that, but it also builds hemoglobin, it builds neurotransmitters, it builds hormones. So, a lot of people super depressed and anxious, and upping your protein is really beneficial. We need the building blocks in order to create those things. So really, really important.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I feel like we could have, several more podcast episodes talking about all this stuff. Tell people where they can find you, what programs you have available, if they wanted to work with you, so we can stay in touch, and I'll put everything in the show notes.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually, speaking of protein, when I go on podcasts, I always want to kind of give away a little bit of something, and it is geared towards protein, because we didn't talk about it much, but that is one of the things that I'm super passionate about, is helping people to eat more protein and to realize benefits, especially if your goal is body fat, losing body fat. So I actually have a free download. It's a protein hunger hacks ebook. So if your listeners just want to go to metflexlife.com/protein, they'll be able to download that. It's just some different recipes that are a little bit higher volume, higher protein. And that will also bring them to all of my other, my website, on Instagram. I'm most active there, at rachelgregory.cns. But yeah, through that link, they'll be able to see my website and everything else there.
All right, perfect. So I'll put that in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's such a fun conversation. I love talking about working out and building muscles and metabolic flexibility. So it's right up my alley. And I hope everyone enjoyed it too. And I'm sure everyone got so much helpful, information from here. So thanks for coming on. Talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.